We've now reached a point where having a tight budget is no longer reason enough to deprive you of all the bragging rights that come with owning an SUV. Now the Tata Punch has been a pick in this regard if you have less than 10 lakhs to spare. But can the Citroen C3, which brings a new take on this segment, make a difference? Now Citroen insists on calling the C3 a hatch, but it can more than hold its own against the clearly SUV-inspired Tata Punch with its added 154mm of length. And it's a handsome car with Citroen doing a great job of distilling its family face onto this more affordable package. The Punch also draws inspiration from the Harrier and Safari with its split headlamp look and the two-step grille arrangement. But both use contrasting colors to add more presence, but the Punch is beefed up further with more cladding. The C3 looks a bit more proportionate. It's only 7mm down on ground clearance from the 180mm off the Punch. The bodywork is also a bit less extroverted, but then again the orange highlights provide good relief. Although there's no hiding the significant cost cutting that comes with the 15-inch steel wheels, the fender-mounted indicator bulbs and the flip-type door handles. The Punch has a larger boot at 366 litres against the 315 litres of the C3, but both have quite high load lips, although the Citroen does carve out a flatter, more usable space. Now with the Punch you get a single 1.2 litre naturally aspirated 3-cylinder petrol engine, which makes 86 PS and 113 Nm. Now in isolation that's not too bad, but the C3 will also give you the turbo option that we'll come to eventually. But yeah, and this motor, it's like one of the typical Tata petrol engines that we've experienced in recent memory. So it's not the most refined, so when you start off there's noticeable vibrations coming through the steering wheel and through the pedals. But once you do get moving, you realize that the engine is quite drivable. Of course, that's when you're up and running, like we are right now. So there is a wide linear power band. So while in terms of outright pace, it's nowhere close to the C3 Turbo, it's perfectly usable in the kind of conditions you will drive the Punch in. So like you can see, we're just at about 2000 RPM ambling along on these hilly roads, which will translate into you sort of ambling along in traffic quite easily. Of course, overtaking performance is lacking, which means that you will have to, say, downshift a gear or two to get to the kind of performance that you need to make overtakes and so on. And when you start using the gear lever, it's a 5-speed manual. You also get an AMT with the Punch, which you don't with the C3. You notice that the gear shifts there are quite nice. They're light. The gear lever is light, precise. The throws aren't too long. More importantly, the clutch is progressive. It's got a well-defined bite point. So changing gears is not really that much of a hassle. Now we'll get to what is probably the best part of the Punch, the way it rides and handles. Now the steering is light. It's like how you would expect a city car to be, which means that it'll be again very easy to use in traffic or parking, and it weighs up naturally. I mean, it will not feel some in that sense when you are going a bit harder, putting in more lock, but it's perfectly usable and works very well with the ride and handling character of this micro SUV, if you will. Because the Punch, when you say drive over bad patches like we are right now, it takes them really well. So you'd barely feel any of it. The suspension is very well damped, so very little of it actually filters into the cabin. There's no harsh bumps or jarring sensations coming through to you. In that sense, the Punch is quite an easy car to drive. It's very easy to get used to, and if you are of an enthusiastic bent, it's the better handler of the two here by a small margin. Now another benefit of the Punch having a naturally aspirated motor in this scenario is that you do get quite a big advantage over the C3 in terms of fuel efficiency. In our real-world mileage testing, we got 16.7 kilometers per litre in the city and 19.7 on the highway with the Punch. The C3 is a much quicker car, but this costs in terms of efficiency, with us managing 11.6 in the city and 16.15 on the highway. Now this is good for a small turbo, but naturally aspirated rivals at this price point are far more frugal. Now you can get the C3 in two engine options, unlike the one that you have in the Punch. So you have a very similar 1.2 litre naturally aspirated 3-cylinder petrol, or what we're driving right now, 1.2 litre turbo petrol, again 3-cylinder. And this motor, this PureTech motor, really is the highlight of the Citroen C3's driving experience, at least in our books, because this turbo petrol, again, it's genuinely impressive in the way it delivers its performance. So to start with, it's quiet, refined, there are not too many stray vibrations, you barely realize that it's a 3-cylinder to begin with. None of those, irritating attributes are there in this motor. It starts off quite cleanly, it's got good low-end torque, unlike the motor in the Punch. Now turbo lag itself is very well controlled, so you have that clean, wide, linear power band, which makes it again very drivable in the city. Top that, you have quite a good amount of performance with the 110 PS and 190 Newton meters. And as you can see from our 0 to 100 times and our in-gear acceleration times, this C3 will keep up with some much bigger SUVs just in terms of its outright pace. Now the C3, in terms of the way it rides, it can't quite match the softness that the Punch has, especially at low speeds. So it's a bit more European in that regard typically. So you feel the bumps, those typical Indian bumps, potholes, cracks on the road, ditches, a bit more, especially at low speeds in the C3. And at high speeds, there's really not much to choose between the two cars in terms of the way they ride. Now again, the way they handle is also quite similar. We like the steering in the C3 a bit more because at least we personally think it weighs up a bit more naturally as speeds rise, but the difference is marginal. And in terms of handling, the rest of the car, again, it feels solid, it feels substantial, it will stay true to its line largely, so there are no surprises. And over a set of corners, much like the Punch, there's some enjoyment to be had. So if you like driving, then both cars here do have something to offer for you. Now another trait that is very similar with the two cars here is the kind of visibility that you have. Both get height adjustable seats, which is a big plus. The steering is placed quite naturally in both. And with their high seating position, they do feel close to SUVs, if not fully like SUVs. Now step into the C3 from the Punch and immediately you get the sense that this is a larger car, and that's down to these vibrant colors and textures, again like in the Punch, that have been used here. But like in the Punch, the quality of plastics is about what you would expect at this price point. They're mostly hard and scratchy, but well textured again. So they work smartly, like Tata Motors, to give you an enhanced sense of quality, even though the materials themselves aren't quite up there. The seats feel a bit wider, again well bolstered, which again adds to that sense of space, along with these larger windows, this larger windscreen. So in terms of outright space, yes, the C3 has a slight edge over the Punch. But look at the C3 in terms of the features list and you realize that this is going to be the deciding factor really between choosing between the two cars here. The absence of features is quite stark here. For example, you get manually operated mirrors. You don't get any of the high-tech features, for example, cruise control, auto headlamps and wipers. You don't get any of that. In fact, the kind of cost cutting that's gone on here is quite stark. For example, you don't get a dead pedal, and if you want to start the car, you don't need to press the clutch. That safety feature that you get in many cars, almost all cars nowadays, isn't there. There's also no warning for you when you leave the key in the keyhole. This instrumentation is really quite bare. You get a speedometer and a very basic trip computer which gives you the barest of functions. So yeah, in terms of features, there's really quite a bit missing here. You don't get climate control, so this manual knob doesn't quite feel as substantial, or these combi switches, they don't feel as hefty as the one in the Tata. The steering wheel doesn't get that leather wrapping. You get these small buttons here. The gear lever is a bit, plasticky. So in that sense, there could have been slightly better use of materials in this regard as well. Now, once you step inside the Punch, you can't miss that typical door third that you expect in a Tata, of that strong build. And when you sit inside, you notice that the Punch gives you just that bit more of that SUV sort of feeling in terms of the way it's designed mainly. For example, these horizontal layers that make up the top half of the dash, they sort of lend you that sense of being in an SUV. And these textures, for example, this texture here for the plastic, or this brushed effect here, or the tri-arrow effect that you find here, they sort of lend you that sense of being in a premium space. Although that might not necessarily be true, because you realize that both the cars here are built to a price. For example, these panel gaps aren't quite, consistent here. But again, there are other touches, for example, the way this AC vent functions or the way these switches function, which are a touch more damped, a bit better feeling in terms of quality than in the C3. Now coming to how the seats feel in the Punch, you notice that the cabin doesn't feel as wide as it is in the C3, even though the Punch is a wider car, and that's largely down to those seats. They are a bit narrower than the ones in the C3. So if you are a wider adult, then maybe they aren't the best fit for you, especially with these heavily bolstered sides. Now where the Punch really scores over the C3 is in the sheer amount of gadgetry that's on board here. You get connected tech, you get What 3 Words navigation, you get some nice sounding Harman audio, you get climate control, you get auto headlamps and wipers, you get cruise control, and you get this partly digital instrumentation, which usually we aren't big fans of, but here at this price point it does make a lot of sense with the sheer functions that you can control through here, a lot of information available to you quite easily. You also get drive modes, which is another big addition at this price. So yeah, in terms of features, the Punch really has it over the C3. But yes, the C3 is still the more practical car in terms of thoughtful storage spaces. Now getting into the C3 isn't as easy as in the Punch, mainly because this opening here is quite narrow and there's a high sill, and the doors don't open obviously to the 90 degrees that the ones in the Punch do. But once you're inside, there's quite a big difference in the sense of space between the two cars. You have this theatre style seating, which really helps. You sit quite high up, higher than these row of seats. The windows are large, so you get that sense that you are in a car which is quite a bit larger than the one in the Punch. But again, you notice that the middle passenger will be slightly hampered because there is a big hump here. So in terms of placing their feet, there is a problem, even though that big difference in wheelbase shows in terms of knee and leg room. The Citroen is significantly longer, and that shows. And in terms of seats, the seats themselves, they are a bit flatter than the one in the Punch. They don't feel as body hugging as the one in the Punch, which is a bit of a drawback. So for example, if you are moving around too much in the car, that's going to happen more in the C3 than in the Punch. But again, there's good underthigh support. We would have liked head restraints, which again, safety should have been a stronger suit with the Citroen. There's a distinct lack of safety features as well. Now, like in the front of the C3 where safety is a big attribute, here it's a mixed bag. You do get two USB ports, which the Punch misses out on, which is a big miss. But again, the power windows are centrally mounted, so they're not that easy to reach. And the cup holders here, quite unlike the ones in the front, they're tiny, just enough for one bottle. So yeah, it's a mixed bag in terms of practicality in the back seat of the C3. So there's no dimming rear view mirror, no rear washer or wiper, no ISOFIX child seat mounts or a rear camera. You don't even need to press the clutch to start the car, which is a genuine hazard. In contrast, the Punch carries a 5-star global NCAP safety rating with all these features present. The only drawback here is the lack of ESC. Now stepping into the Punch is a lot easier than in the C3, mainly because of these 90-degree doors that are a big talking point with this Alpha platform of Tata Motors. And the seat height too, the hip point is quite high and this opening too is quite large, so getting in is not an issue at all. The door pockets are large too, unlike in the front, so again that's a positive. And you notice that again it's a very comfortable space to be in. Of course, in terms of knee room and leg room, the C3 has the edge because of its much longer wheelbase, but otherwise in absolute terms you have great underside support. And it's nice that you get a center armrest here, because look at this, you can place your arms at an even angle, so it's very comfortable. There's a flat floor, so if you do carry a fifth passenger, they'll be happier in the Punch than in the C3. But again, the practicality that the C3 does well is lacking here. You get this small insert for your phone and a pocket here, but as you can see, no power outlets, which is a big miss. Now in terms of seat cushioning, again it's that slightly firm cushioning but not too firm that Tata puts in most of its cars. And it's again well contoured. The seat back, it's at a nice angle, and this head restraint here is a great touch. So yeah, in terms of safety, which is a big talking point for the Punch, even the rear passenger is better served than in the C3. The C3, in true Citroen fashion, brings a fresh take on an affordable family car. It's about as good as a car in this price range can get, with its looks, space and driving feel. Had it been better packaged or fully lived up to its no-frills brief in terms of price, the Tata Punch would have had a tougher job. As it stands, the Punch offers more of what a new or cost-sensitive car buyer might want, with its long features list, a touch more SUV character, good efficiency and competent driving dynamics.